650 young women entered her castle. None ever left. Today on Tyrant Tales, the true story of Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess who bathed in the blood of virgins to stay young forever. But this isn't a vampire legend. This is documented history, and the truth is far more terrifying than any myth. Section 1. Noble Birth. Elizabeth Báthory was born on August 7, 1560, into one of the most powerful families in Hungary. The Báthorys ruled Transylvania, controlled vast estates, and counted kings and princes among their ranks. Her uncle Stephen Báthory was king of Poland, but that family tree was twisted with something darker. Years of inbreeding had produced relatives known for madness, cruelty, and obsession with the occult. Young Elizabeth was beautiful, intelligent, and highly educated. She could read and write fluently, spoke Latin, German, and Greek with ease. But she also suffered from severe epileptic seizures starting around age 4, violent fits that left her thrashing and confused. At age 10, Elizabeth was betrothed to Count Ferenc Nadasdy. They married on May 8, 1575, when Elizabeth was just 15 years old. The wedding at Verano Castle was spectacular, with over 4,500 guests including the Holy Roman Emperor himself. Ferenc's wedding gift was Castle Cactus, an imposing fortress in the Little Carpathian Mountains. It would become the setting for unspeakable horrors, but Ferenc was often away, leading Hungarian forces against invading Ottoman armies. Elizabeth was left alone in that remote castle with absolute power over everyone around her and no one to restrain her darkest impulses. Section 2. The killings begin. In January 1604, Count Ferenc died at age 47. With her husband's death, Elizabeth's last restraint vanished completely. At 43 years old, she was now a wealthy widow with full control over vast estates and no husband to answer to. The killings had begun years earlier, but after Ferenc's death, Elizabeth stopped being careful. She started luring peasant girls to Castle Cactus with promises of good paying work as servants. These were daughters of farmers, girls from families so poor they couldn't refuse the opportunity. Once inside the castle walls, these girls discovered the horrifying truth. Elizabeth had built special torture chambers designed specifically for inflicting maximum pain. With 4 trusted accomplices, she transformed her castle into a house of horrors. The torture methods were documented in excruciating detail during later trials. Elizabeth would jam pins and needles under fingernails, slowly pushing them deeper as victims screamed. She beat them with heavy clubs until bones shattered. She used scissors to cut off fingers one by one, then sliced open veins and watched them bleed. When Elizabeth was ill and confined to bed, she still demanded victims be brought to her. She would bite chunks of flesh from their faces and breasts. One witness testified that she bit girls so violently they sometimes died from the wounds and infections. The servants who worked alongside Elizabeth became increasingly disturbed but also complicit. They helped hide bodies, burying them secretly around the castle grounds or in church graveyards under cover of darkness. But the bodies kept piling up, and soon there were too many to hide effectively. Section 3. The horror escalates. As Elizabeth's confidence grew, so did the brutality. During freezing Hungarian winters, she developed particularly cruel torture. She would have naked girls dragged outside into the snow, then order servants to pour buckets of ice-cold water over their bodies repeatedly. The water would freeze on their skin in sub-zero temperatures, creating a shell of ice. The girls would be left outside until they froze to death, their skin turning blue, then black. Elizabeth would watch from her warm chamber windows as they died slowly in the courtyard below. She applied red-hot irons directly to the soles of victims' feet, burning through skin and muscle. She heated coins until they glowed orange, then pressed them into hands and faces. She held burning candles against bare skin, letting hot wax drip onto open wounds. According to testimony, so much blood flowed that servants had to place cinders around Elizabeth's bed to absorb it all. She would cut strategic spots on girls' bodies where blood would pour freely and let them bleed out slowly while she watched. And then there were the bloodbaths. Elizabeth believed, possibly encouraged by her accomplice who practiced witchcraft, that bathing in the blood of young virgins would preserve her youth and beauty. Whether she actually filled tubs with blood is disputed, but what is certain is that she was obsessed with youth and terrified of aging. She would stab girls and let their blood flow over her hands and arms. She bit them until they bled, consuming their flesh. The blood rituals, whatever their exact form, were real. The girls suffered in ways almost impossible to comprehend. One victim endured more than 200 blows before dying. Others had hands and arms bound so tightly that circulation was cut off, turning their limbs black before death came. If these historical horrors are shocking you, subscribe to Tyrant Tales. We uncover the true stories behind history's darkest legends. Hit that subscribe button because what happens next is even more disturbing. Section 4. The Investigation. For years, Elizabeth's crimes went unpunished because she was nobility and her victims were peasants. Local families began hiding their daughters. But who would believe them against a countess from one of Hungary's most powerful families? But Elizabeth made a fatal mistake. Around 1609, she began targeting daughters of the lesser nobility. These girls were supposed to learn courtly etiquette from the famous countess. Instead, they disappeared. And when noble daughters started vanishing, people in power finally paid attention. A Lutheran minister named István Magyari began making formal complaints starting around 1602. For years, nothing happened. But in 1610, King Matthias II finally ordered Georgi Thurzo, who was Elizabeth's cousin, to investigate. By October 1610, investigators had gathered 52 witness statements. By the investigation's end, that number had risen to over 300 witnesses. Survivors came forward with horrific stories. The evidence was overwhelming. On December 30th, 1610, Count Thurzo led a raid on Castle Cactus. According to his account, he found Elizabeth having dinner and discovered evidence of recent torture, one dead girl and another living victim too traumatized to speak. His men found ample evidence. They began digging up bodies around the castle grounds. Skeletons emerged from hidden graves. The physical evidence backed up the witness statements. During the investigation, an even more shocking piece of evidence allegedly surfaced, a diary in Elizabeth's handwriting that listed the names of 650 victims. Some historians question whether this diary existed, but whether the number was 650 or 80 that she was officially charged with. The scale was unprecedented. Section 5, Punishment Legacy. The trial began on January 2nd, 1611, but Elizabeth Báthory herself was not present. She was not allowed to attend her own trial or defend herself, despite repeatedly requesting the opportunity. Only her 4 accomplices stood trial. The testimony was so disturbing that even experienced judges were visibly shaken. The accomplices eventually confessed to helping bury between 36 and 51 bodies. The verdicts were swift and brutal. 2 accomplices were sentenced to death. Before being burned alive, executioners ripped off their fingers with red-hot pokers. Another was beheaded before his body was thrown into flames. One received life imprisonment. But Elizabeth Báthory, despite overwhelming evidence, was never formally tried or convicted. King Matthias wanted her executed publicly, but her relatives held too much power. The political ramifications would be catastrophic. So instead, Elizabeth was sentenced to perpetual solitary confinement. She was imprisoned in her own castle, walled up alive in a set of rooms in one of the towers. Masons bricked up the windows and door, leaving only small slits for air and food. She couldn't see outside. She couldn't speak to anyone. Elizabeth survived in that imprisonment for nearly 4 years. On August 20th, 1614, she complained to her bodyguard that her hands were cold. The next morning, the 54-year-old countess was found dead in her chamber. She was initially buried in the church at Castle Cactus, but local villagers were so outraged that her body was moved to her birthplace. Even in death, she found no peace. Elizabeth Báthory's story proves that the most terrifying monsters weren't creatures of legend. They were real people protected by wealth and power. For decades, she tortured and murdered with impunity because she was nobility and her victims were powerless. Only when she started killing daughters of other nobles did the system finally act. Her crimes inspired vampire legends for centuries. The image of her bathing in virgin blood became the foundation for countless horror stories. But strip away the legends and what remains is even more frightening: a real woman who inflicted unimaginable suffering on hundreds of girls for sadistic pleasure and fear of aging. She represents the darkest potential of unchecked power. What shocked you most about the Blood Countess? The scale of her crimes? The fact she was never tried? The torture methods? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want more true stories behind history's darkest legends, subscribe to Tyrant Tales. Hit that like button and join us as we uncover the real monsters hiding in history's shadows. Until next time, remember, sometimes the truth is far more terrifying than any vampire tale.